Imagine you're a quiet kid at a new school. You have a disability and you try your best just to get through the day without anyone bothering you. But then the worst happens. In the middle of class, in front of everyone, a group of bullies decides to make an example of you. They take a pair of scissors and cut off your long hair, the one thing that helps you feel safe, just to humiliate you. Because today, our story is about Maya, a girl in a wheelchair whose classmates tried to break her spirit by taking her dignity. They laughed when she didn't cry or fight back. They thought her silence meant she was weak and that they had won. What they didn't know was that her silence wasn't weakness at all. It was her sharpening a weapon they never, ever saw coming. The sound was the first thing you noticed about Maya Rivera. It wasn't her voice because she rarely used it. It was the quiet, rhythmic whir of her wheelchair tires on the polished linoleum floors of Northgate High. It was a sound that seemed to part the sea of students, not out of respect, but out of a clumsy, awkward necessity. They would step aside, their conversations pausing for only a half-second before resuming, leaving Maya in the silent wake of their laughter and chatter. She was an island, and the wheels were the sound of the tide pulling away from her shores. Today was no different. Her first week at a new school felt like a year. She kept her head down, her focus aimed at a point on the floor about 10 feet ahead. Her hair, long and thick and the color of dark chocolate, fell like a curtain over the right side of her face. It was her shield, her comfort blanket. When she felt the stares of strangers, she could retreat behind it, feeling its familiar weight on her shoulder. It was the one part of her she felt was truly beautiful, untouched by the cerebral palsy that had tethered her to a chair since she was a little girl. She navigated the crowded hallway with a practiced ease that hid the tension in her shoulders. The lockers slammed like gunshots, the shouts of friends greeting each other were a language she didn't speak. She saw a group of girls huddled together, one showing a picture on her phone that made the others erupt in giggles. Maya's hands tightened on her wheel rims. She felt a familiar pang, not of jealousy, but of a deep, hollow invisibility. It was as if she was a ghost, haunting the edges of everyone else's vibrant life. Her destination was the library, her sanctuary during the chaotic lunch hour. The cafeteria was a jungle of social hierarchies she had no interest in climbing. The library, however, was quiet. It smelled of old paper and stillness. She found her usual table in the back corner, tucked away between shelves of history books. She pulled out her sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils. This was where she lived. The blank page was a world she could control. With a few soft strokes, a face began to emerge. Not a perfect face, but one with character. She drew an old man with deep lines around his eyes, each one telling a story of laughter or sorrow. She wasn't just drawing, she was listening to the people in her head. They were her companions, the subjects of her silent conversations. She lost track of time, the world outside her sketchbook fading into a dull hum. The paper was her voice, the charcoal her words. The bell signaling the end of lunch was a harsh intrusion. Maya carefully placed a protective sheet over her drawing and tucked the sketchbook back into her bag. As she wheeled out of the library, she passed a group of boys leaning against the lockers. One of them, the tallest one with a Letterman jacket and an easy, arrogant smile, was Zach. He was the king of this little kingdom, and he knew it. He saw her coming and nudged his friend. He didn't move out of the way. He just watched her approach, a smirk playing on his lips. Maya stopped, waiting. "Check it out," Zach said to his friends, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's like a personal little taxi. You ever get a speeding ticket in that thing?" His friends snickered. A girl with him, Kelsey, giggled nervously, tucking her blonde hair behind her ear and looking at Zach for approval. Maya's face grew hot. She felt the curtain of her own hair and wished it could cover her entire body. She said nothing. She just stared at her hands, waiting for him to move. He finally sidestepped, making an exaggerated gesture of opening a path for her. "After you, Your Highness." The laughter followed her down the hall. Each chuckle felt like a small stone hitting her back. She didn't look up. She just kept her eyes on that spot 10 feet ahead, her jaw clenched tight. The whir of her wheels sounded louder now, more fragile. Her last class of the day was art. It was the only place she felt she could breathe. The room smelled of turpentine and clay and possibilities. Her teacher, Ms. Diaz, was a woman with kind eyes and paint smudges on her forearms. She never looked at Maya's chair first. She always looked right at Maya's face. "Tough day?" Ms. Diaz asked softly as Maya settled at her usual table. Maya just shrugged, pulling out her sketchbook. She didn't want to talk about it. Talking gave it power. Ms. Diaz came over and looked at the drawing of the old man. She didn't offer empty praise. She studied it, her head tilted. You see things other people don't, Maya. You see the stories. Maya felt a small flicker of warmth in her chest. She risked a glance up at her teacher. Ms. Diaz smiled, a genuine, knowing smile. You know, some people speak with their voice. They shout and make a lot of noise. She paused, tapping a finger on Maya's sketchbook. Others? They speak with their work. And sometimes that's the voice that echoes the loudest. The words settled over Maya, a balm on the fresh wound of Zach's mockery. She looked down at her drawing at the silent, dignified story on the page. For the first time all day, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. The air in Mr. Harmon's biology class was thick and sleepy. The drone of his voice talking about cell mitosis was a familiar lullaby that sent half the class into a stupor. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating dancing dust motes in the air. For Maya, it was usually a class she could disappear in, a place to doodle in the margins of her notebook while the world went on without her. But today was different. Due to a seating chart change for a new lab project, her assigned station was at a large, blacktop table in the middle of the room. And her lab partners were Zach and Kelsey. Maya felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach as she wheeled up to the table. Kelsey offered a small, weak smile and immediately looked away, suddenly very interested in organizing her test tubes. Zach, however, leaned back in his stool, arms crossed, watching Maya as if she were a curious specimen under a microscope. He didn't help her get settled or move his bag out of the way. He just watched. Mr. Harmon, a man who seemed permanently lost in his own lesson plans, droned on from the front of the room. Work together, class. Communication is key to scientific discovery. The irony was not lost on Maya. Zach leaned over to Kelsey, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for Maya to hear. Look at all that hair. It's like a horse's tail. Kelsey giggled, that same nervous, high-pitched sound from the hallway. Zach, stop it. But she didn't sound like she meant it. She was basking in his attention, a moth drawn to a flame, even if it meant someone else might get burned. Maya tried to ignore them. She focused on the instructions for the lab, reading the words over and over without any of them making sense. Her heart was beating a fast, frantic rhythm against her ribs. She could feel their eyes on the back of her head, on her hair. Her shield. Her one point of pride. I dare you, Zach whispered to Kelsey. Just a little snip. She won't even notice. Kelsey's eyes widened. No way. Mr. Harmon will see. Zach glanced at the teacher, who was busy writing a long, complicated diagram on the whiteboard, his back to the class. Harmon doesn't see anything unless a fire alarm goes off. And even then it's 50-50. He opened his backpack and, to Maya's horror, pulled out a small pair of silver scissors, the kind you keep in a pencil case for cutting paper. They glinted under the fluorescent lights. Kelsey looked from the scissors to Maya's hair, then back to Zach. She was hesitating. A part of her knew this was wrong, but the other part, the part that craved popularity and Zach's approval, was winning the battle. She let out another shaky laugh. Maya froze. She could feel the heat rising in her neck. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to turn around, to say something, to will away. But she was paralyzed. It was the same feeling she got in the hallway, that sense of being a ghost, a thing instead of a person. If she moved, it would make it real. If she stayed perfectly still, maybe it wouldn't happen. Then she felt it. A cold, metallic touch against the ends of her hair. She sucked in a sharp breath. Zach's voice was a venomous whisper right by her ear. Just giving you a little makeover. Lighten the load. Snip. The sound was small, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner and Mr. Harmon's voice. But to Maya it was as loud as a thunderclap. It echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of her mind. A piece of her, a long, dark curl that had taken years to grow, fell silently onto the black tabletop. It lay there like a question mark. A few students at the next table who had been watching stifled their laughter. Zach dropped the scissors back into his bag with a triumphant grin. Kelsey covered her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and twisted amusement. Maya just stared at the lock of hair on the table. It was a part of her and now it was separate, lying lifeless on the cold surface. She slowly lifted her gaze and looked toward the front of the room. For a split second, her eyes met Mr. Harmon's in the reflection of the whiteboard. She saw him see it. She saw the flicker of comprehension in his eyes, the dawning horror. And then, just as quickly, she saw him turn away, pretending he hadn't noticed. He cleared his throat and pointed to his diagram, his voice a little louder than before. In that moment, the laughter and the snipping of the scissors hurt less than the teacher's silence. The silence was a betrayal. It told her she wasn't worth the trouble. It confirmed what the bullies believed: she didn't matter. The rest of the class was a blur. Maya didn't move. She didn't speak. She just sat there, staring at her sketchbook, which lay closed on her lap. The blank cover seemed to mock her. A war raged inside her. Scream. Yell. Report them. Go to the principal's office and demand justice. Let the tears that were burning behind her eyes finally fall. But another voice, a quieter, deeper one, rose up to meet the fury. What would happen? Zach would deny it. Kelsey would back him up. People would say she was overreacting. They would look at her with pity, their whispers following her down the hall. She would become that girl, the victim. They would have taken not just her hair but her story too. She stared at the blank cover of her sketchbook. Fight or stay silent. But maybe those weren't the only two options. Maybe, as Ms. Diaz had said, there was another way to speak. A way that was louder than shouting. I have to pause here. This moment is so full of injustice, and it's hard to watch someone go through that. For anyone watching, where are you watching from today? And more importantly, how are you feeling for Maya right now? Let me know in the comments below. Let's continue. The final bell rang, releasing the students in a torrent of noise and energy. But Maya didn't move. She waited until the classroom was nearly empty, until the echoes of slammed books and laughing goodbyes faded down the hall. She slowly packed her bag, her hands moving with a heavy, deliberate slowness. She left the severed lock of her hair lying on the black tabletop, a silent accusation for whoever had to clean the room. She didn't look at it as she left. She didn't go to the principal's office. She didn't go find Mr. Harmon and demand to know why he had looked away. Instead, she wheeled herself down the quiet, empty hallway to the art room. Ms. Diaz was cleaning brushes in a large sink, the water stained with the rainbow of acrylics. She looked up as Maya entered, and her smile faltered when she saw Maya's face. It was a blank mask, but her eyes held a storm. Maya? What is it? Maya's throat felt tight, as if filled with sand. She swallowed hard. Ms. Diaz, she said, her voice raspy. I have a big project for another class. I might need an extension on my painting. It was all she could manage. It was a simple, practical request, but underneath it, Ms. Diaz heard the tremor of something much deeper. She saw the new, jagged edge to Maya's long hair, how it fell unevenly on one side. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't press for details or offer pity. She just dried her hands on a rag, her gaze soft and steady. Of course, Maya. Take all the time you need, she said gently. Art isn't on a deadline. It arrives when it's ready. That was it. Permission. Understanding. Maya gave her a small, tight nod of thanks and left. The short interaction was an anchor in the swirling chaos of her emotions. The ride home was a blur. The familiar streets looked strange and hostile. When she got to her house, she went straight to her bedroom and locked the door. She positioned her chair in front of the full-length mirror on her closet door and stared at her reflection. She saw a girl she barely recognized. A girl with frightened eyes and a strange, lopsided haircut. The right side, where Zach's scissors had struck, was a clumsy, shorter length that stuck out at an odd angle. It was a mark of shame. A brand. Every time she looked at it, she would remember the snip, the laughter, the teacher who did nothing. Tears finally welled in her eyes, hot and angry. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. They had taken something from her. They had tried to make her feel small and powerless. They thought they had won. She reached for the sewing scissors on her desk. They were heavy and sharp. Her hands were shaking, but her resolve was like steel. She looked at her reflection, at the long, beautiful hair she had hidden behind for so long. It was a curtain, and they had tried to tear it. Fine, she thought. You want to tear it? I'll burn the whole thing down. She took a deep breath. Then, with a decisive, powerful chop, she cut another piece. And another. She wasn't crying anymore. This wasn't an act of surrender. It was an act of war. It was an act of taking back control. They had cut her hair to humiliate her. She was cutting the rest to liberate herself. Large dark locks of hair fell to the floor around her wheelchair, piling up like fallen soldiers. With each snip, she felt lighter. The shield was coming down. The curtain was being torn away. When she was done, her hair was a ragged, uneven pixie cut. It was a mess. But it was her mess. She stared at her reflection again. Her face was fully exposed now. Her high cheekbones, her strong jaw, her wide, dark eyes. There was nothing to hide behind. She looked raw, vulnerable, but powerful. Later that evening, she sat at her desk and pulled out her sketchbook. But she didn't open it to a new page. She took out a fresh, large sheet of high-quality drawing paper from a folder. She taped it to a board. She picked up a stick of thick, black charcoal. And she began to draw. This was different. The lines were not soft and gentle. They were bold, angry, and confrontational. She drew from a place of pure, undiluted emotion. The images that poured out of her were fierce and unsettling. She worked for hours, hiding each finished piece in a large, protective art folder. The next day at school, she went to the art room during her free period. Ms. Diaz was there as always. Maya felt nervous, exposed with her new jagged haircut. Ms. Diaz looked at her, but her expression was unreadable, simply observant. "You look different," Ms. Diaz said, her tone neutral. "I decided to make a change," Maya said, her voice quiet but firm. Ms. Diaz nodded slowly, accepting the explanation without question. She watched as Maya worked on a simple still life, her focus intense. After a while, Ms. Diaz came over to her table. "Maya," she said, her voice low. "Whatever you are feeling, whatever you are thinking, put it in the work. Don't let it poison you. Let it be the fuel." She glanced at the large, mysterious folder tucked beside Maya's chair. "And if you ever create something you want to show the world, something that needs to be said, I'll back you up. I'll make sure they have to look." Maya looked up at her teacher at this quiet, unwavering ally. For the second time, Ms. Diaz had given her exactly what she needed without even knowing the whole story. She had given her a shield far stronger than hair. She had given her a sword. A week passed. Maya's short hair was no longer a shock to the other students, it was just a fact. Some whispered that she'd had a breakdown. Others assumed it was a fashion statement. No one knew the truth, and Maya offered no explanation. She moved through the halls with a new quiet intensity. Her head was held a little higher. With no hair to hide behind, she was forced to meet the world head-on. Zach and Kelsey left her alone, seeming to have forgotten their cruel game, moving on to other targets. But Maya had not forgotten. Every year, Northgate High hosted the Unspoken Voices art show. It was a chance for students to submit art, poetry, and photography anonymously. The idea was to let the work speak for itself, free from the popularity contests and social politics of high school. The pieces were displayed in the main gallery hall for a week, and students could vote on their favorites. On the final day for submissions, Maya wheeled herself to the art room after school. The large black portfolio was balanced on her lap. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was her response. Ms. Diaz was collecting the last of the submissions. She saw Maya and the portfolio, and a small, knowing smile touched her lips. Maya approached the submission table and, without a word, placed 3 large, covered illustration boards on it. There was no name, no signature, just the required entry number on the back. Ms. Diaz simply nodded. "I'll make sure they're hung properly." The next Monday, the gallery hall was buzzing with students. The walls were covered in a wild assortment of creativity, vibrant paintings, moody black and white photos, sculptures made of wire and clay. Students milled about, pointing out their friends' suspected work and casting their votes in a small locked box. And then people started to notice them. The 3 pieces hung together in a prominent spot. They were stark, powerful, and utterly arresting. They were done in charcoal, black and white in shades of gray, which made them stand out against the more colorful pieces around them. The first drawing was of a handsome, smiling boy with a crown on his head. But instead of jewels, the crown was made of barbed wire. In his hand, he held a pair of scissors, and from the scissors dripped a single, black tear. The title plate beneath it read simply, "The King of Nothing." The second piece was even more visceral. It depicted a girl from behind, her hair shorn off in ragged, angry cuts. But where the hair had been too magnificent, feathered wings were beginning to sprout, reaching for the sky. A knife lay on the ground behind her, its blade labeled with the single, sharp word, "Power." The title of this piece was The Unburdening. The third piece was the one that made everyone stop and fall silent. It showed a girl sitting in a wheelchair, but she wasn't small or weak. Flames, drawn with furious, energetic strokes, licked up around the chair, not consuming her, but emanating from her. Her face was calm, her eyes looking directly at the viewer. And at the bottom in neat, block letters was a quote, "You thought my silence was weakness. You were wrong." The effect was immediate. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd. Who drew these? Wow, that's intense. Wait a minute, look at the second one. The hair. The students started to put it together. They remembered the incident in biology class, which had been a brief bit of classroom gossip. They remembered Maya's sudden, dramatic haircut. They looked at the drawings, then at each other. The art wasn't just art, it was a story. A testimony. By lunchtime, the 3 charcoal drawings were all anyone could talk about. They weren't just good, they were brilliant. They were raw and honest in a way that most of the other pieces weren't. The anonymity only made them more powerful. Who was this artist? Who had this much courage? The principal, Mr. Davies, came to see them himself. He stood before the 3 pieces for a long time, his hands clasped behind his back. He was deeply moved and intrigued. He went to Ms. Diaz. "Do you know who the artist is?" he asked. "This is extraordinary. We need to recognize this student." Ms. Diaz, polishing a piece of pottery, simply shook her head. "The submissions are anonymous, Mr. Davies. That's the point of unspoken voices." Maya heard the whispers as she wheeled through the halls. She saw people looking at the drawings and then glancing at her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and dawning respect. She kept her face impassive, her secret held tight in her chest. For the first time, she was the one controlling the narrative. She had taken their ugly little secret and turned it into public art. She hadn't said a word, but her voice was the loudest one in the entire school. The buzz in the school was getting louder and louder. Everyone was talking, and the truth was starting to surface in a way no one expected. If you're feeling the tension build and want to see how this unfolds, take a quick moment to click that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Friday arrived, and with it the school-wide assembly to announce the winner of the Unspoken Voices art show. The gymnasium was packed, a roaring sea of teenagers buzzing with energy. The bleachers vibrated with the stomping of feet and the chatter of 1,000 conversations. Maya found a spot for her chair on the floor near the side, a place where she could see without being the center of attention. She felt a nervous energy thrumming through her, a mix of fear and exhilarating anticipation. The principal, Mr. Davies, stood at the podium in the center of the gym floor. He went through the usual announcements: the bake sale, the upcoming football game, a reminder about parking permits. The student body grew restless, waiting for the main event. "And now," Mr. Davies said, his voice booming through the microphone, "the moment you've all been waiting for. The winner of this year's Unspoken Voices art competition." A hush fell over the gymnasium. "This year the voting was overwhelming," he continued. "While there were many incredible submissions, one artist's work captivated and moved this school in a profound way. The winner is the artist behind the charcoal series." On the giant projection screen behind him, the 3 images flashed up in succession. First, the King of Nothing with his barbed wire crown. Then the Unburdening with the girl sprouting wings. And finally, the powerful image of the girl in the wheelchair surrounded by flames. A collective gasp went through the student body. Seeing the images blown up to that massive size gave them an undeniable, monumental power. They weren't just hallway art anymore. They were a declaration. Murmurs erupted throughout the bleachers. This time, they weren't just whispers. They were loud enough to be understood. "It is about Maya. Look at the wheelchair in that last one. It has to be. So that means Zach really did that." All at once, hundreds of pairs of eyes turned from the screen and scanned the crowd, looking for 2 people, Maya and Zach. Zach was sitting in the middle of the bleachers with his football buddies. He had been laughing and joking just a moment before, but now his face was ashen. The blood had drained from it, leaving him pale under the harsh gym lights. His smug grin was gone, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. His friends shifted away from him, creating a small, almost imperceptible space around him. The crown of popularity he wore so proudly was suddenly made of barbed wire, and he was feeling every single point. Across the gym, Kelsey was staring at the screen, her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wide with dawning horror and shame. People were looking at her, too. She was part of the story, the nervous giggler, the accomplice. She hunched her shoulders, trying to make herself smaller, wishing the floor would swallow her whole. And then the eyes found Maya. She sat in her chair, watching the screen, her expression unreadable. She didn't look triumphant or smug. She just looked calm. She felt the weight of their gazes, but for the first time it wasn't pity or mockery. It was awe. It was understanding. It was respect. They weren't just looking at a girl in a wheelchair anymore. They were looking at an artist. A warrior. The principal cleared his throat, his own expression somber as he, too, seemed to grasp the full story laid bare by the art. As the artist has chosen to remain anonymous, we cannot give them the award directly. But on behalf of the entire school, I want to say, thank you. Thank you for your courage and your voice. The gym, which had been murmuring, suddenly erupted in applause. It wasn't the polite clapping for a school announcement. It was thunderous, genuine, and sustained. It was a standing ovation for a ghost. Later that day, Maya went to the art room. Miss Diaz was there putting away supplies. The room was quiet, a peaceful haven after the storm of the assembly. Maya wheeled up to her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Maya broke the silence. Her voice was clear and steady. That was me. Ms. Diaz stopped what she was doing. She turned to face Maya and a slow, proud smile spread across her face. It was a smile that said, I knew it all along. She didn't shower her with praise or congratulations. She knew Maya didn't need that. She met her as an equal. I know, she said softly. She looked into Maya's eyes, seeing the new strength that resided there. The whole school knows, even if they don't know, they know. She paused, her smile fading into a look of serious inquiry. So, now what? It was the most important question anyone had ever asked her. The art had spoken for her. It had turned the tables, exposed the truth, and shifted the power dynamic of the entire school. But it had all been done from behind a curtain of anonymity. What was the next step? Maya looked down at her own hands resting in her lap. They were stained with charcoal dust. They were the hands that had taken back her story. She looked back up at Ms. Diaz, and for the first time, there was no fear in her eyes. Only resolve. Now, Maya said, her voice filled with a quiet power she didn't know she possessed. Now I'll say it out loud. The world had shifted for Zach. The whispers that used to be about his touchdowns and parties were now about him and a pair of scissors. People looked at him differently in the hallways. The reverence was gone, replaced by a mixture of disdain and disappointment. His throne was crumbling, and he knew who to blame. He felt the heat of their judgment, a constant, simmering pressure. He was no longer the king. He was the villain in a story everyone was telling. His insecurity, the very thing that drove his cruelty, was now on full display, and it made him desperate. He needed to reassert his power. He needed to make Maya small again. He found her after school by her locker. It was the first time he'd approached her since the incident. She was putting her books away, her movements calm and methodical. You think you're a real hero now, don't you? He sneered, his voice low and menacing. He stood too close, trying to use his height to intimidate her. Maya didn't flinch. She finished putting her textbook in her bag and turned to face him. Her eyes were steady. I don't think I'm a hero, Zach. Oh yeah, he shot back, his anger rising. Everyone's talking about your stupid drawings. You made me look like a monster. I didn't draw you, Maya said, her voice even. I drew a boy in a crown. If you saw yourself in that, it's not because of my charcoal. It's because of your choices. Her words hit him like a physical blow. He was stunned by her directness, by her lack of fear. This wasn't the timid, silent girl he had tormented. This was someone else entirely. His confusion quickly curdled back into rage. He needed to shatter this newfound confidence. You're nothing, he spat, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. In a sudden, impulsive act of fury, he shoved her sketchbook, which was resting on her lap, sending it clattering to the floor. Pages flew everywhere, scattering like fallen leaves. Her drawings, her private world, were strewn across the dirty linoleum for everyone to see. Several students in the hallway gasped. And this time, a teacher saw it happen. Mr. Harmon was walking out of his classroom and stopped dead in his tracks. He saw Zach standing over Maya, his fists clenched. He saw the sketchbook on the floor, its intimate pages exposed. This time, there was no whiteboard to hide behind. There was no plausible deniability. He had seen a clear, deliberate act of bullying. The memory of his own inaction in the classroom, the image of the severed lock of hair, flashed in his mind. The shame was a cold, heavy weight in his gut. Maya looked down at her scattered drawings. For a moment, the old vulnerability flickered in her eyes. But it was only a flicker. Slowly, calmly, she bent down from her chair and began to pick up the pages one by one. She didn't rush. She treated each drawing with care. Zach stood there expecting tears or an outburst. He got neither. When she had gathered all her pages, she looked up at him. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the hallway silence. I'm not a hero, Zach, she repeated. I was just someone you thought you could break. But I'm not broken. She paused, holding his gaze. And I'm not scared of you anymore. With that, she placed the sketchbook back on her lap, turned her chair, and wheeled away, leaving him standing there, exposed and powerless, with the entire hallway watching. Mr. Harmon finally moved. He walked over to Zach, his face grim. "My office." "Now," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The next day, a notice went up on the school's main bulletin board. It announced a special addition to the agenda for the upcoming school board meeting. A student, the announcement read, had been invited to speak about the role of art in student expression and anti-bullying initiatives. The featured speaker was listed as Maya Rivera. She had done it. She had signed up to speak. She was taking her voice from the anonymous pages of her sketchbook and bringing it into the most public, most official forum the school had. She wasn't just planning to say it out loud. She was planning to make sure the people in charge had to listen. This was bigger than Zach now. This was about the silence of adults like Mr. Harmon. It was about creating a school where no one had to feel invisible ever again. The quiet revenge was over. The public reckoning was about to begin. The day before the school board meeting, a wave of nervous excitement followed Maya through the school. People offered her quiet words of encouragement. "We're with you," a girl whispered as she passed her in the library. A boy from her English class gave her a thumbs up. She had become an unlikely symbol of courage. The weight of their expectations was both empowering and terrifying. She spent her lunch hour in the gallery hall standing before her own artwork. The school had decided to leave the winning pieces up until after the board meeting. She looked at the drawings that had started it all, a silent trilogy of her pain and her power. She was gathering her strength from them, reminding herself why she was doing this. The final bell rang and she headed to the art room for one last conversation with Ms. Diaz before the big night. When she wheeled into the hallway where the gallery was, she saw a small crowd of students gathered, their faces a mixture of shock and anger. They were clustered around her exhibit. A cold dread washed over Maya. She pushed her way through the throng and then she saw it. Her world tilted. The drawings had been destroyed. The king of nothing was ripped clean in half, the boy's crown had severed from his body. The unburdening was worse. Someone had taken a thick, black marker and scribbled furiously over the sprouting wings, obliterating them under a chaotic mess of ink. And on the third piece, the one that meant the most to her, the one of the girl in the wheelchair surrounded by flames, a single, hateful word had been graffitied across her face in big, red letters: liar. Maya just stared. The air left her lungs. It was a vicious, targeted attack. They hadn't just destroyed her art, they had tried to assassinate her character, to erase her truth. The whispers of support she'd heard all day vanished, replaced by a ringing silence in her ears. All the strength she had so carefully built up over the past few weeks felt like it was crumbling, turning to dust. The crowd parted as Mr. Davies and school security arrived. There were murmurs of "it must have been Zach and this is sick." But the damage was done. The physical evidence of her story had been desecrated. Maya didn't wait to hear the principal's promises of an investigation. She turned her chair and wheeled away, her face a stone mask hiding the cracks that were forming in her spirit. She bypassed the art room and went straight for the exit. She couldn't be in that building anymore. She just wanted to go home. She wanted to hide. That evening, she sat in her room, the door locked. The speech she had so carefully written for the board meeting lay on her desk, the words seeming hollow and naive now. What was the point? They had taken her voice away again, this time by shouting over it with a can of spray paint. She was just a girl in a wheelchair again. The power, the fire, it was all an illusion. She buried her face in her hands. She decided she would call the school in the morning and back out. She couldn't do it. A soft knock came at her bedroom door. "Maya." It was her mother. "Honey, there's someone here to see you." "Ms. Diaz." Maya's head snapped up. She didn't want to see anyone, but she couldn't turn her teacher away. She unlocked the door. Ms. Diaz stood in the doorway, her expression gentle but serious. She held a small, flat package in her hands. She didn't say anything about the incident at school. She just looked at Maya's defeated posture, at the unshed tears in her eyes. "I came to give you something," Ms. Diaz said, stepping into the room. She handed the package to Maya. It was a framed photograph. It was one of the school photographer's shots from the assembly. It was a picture of the gymnasium, with the entire student body on their feet, applauding. And in the corner, small but clear, was Maya watching it all unfold. "I thought you should have this," Ms. Diaz said. Maya stared at the photo, at the proof of what her art had accomplished. "They're scared, Maya," Ms. Diaz said softly, her voice cutting through Maya's despair. "What they did today, That wasn't an act of strength. It was an act of pure desperation. She leaned in a little closer. Don't you see? They only hit you this hard when they know they're about to lose. They're trying to silence you because they know tomorrow everyone is going to listen. The words sunk in deep into the cracked foundation of Maya's resolve. They hit hardest when they're about to lose. She looked from the photo to Ms. Diaz's unwavering eyes. The teacher wasn't offering pity. She was offering a weapon. Perspective. A tiny ember which Maya thought had been extinguished began to glow again. They had destroyed her art. But they hadn't destroyed the truth. They hadn't destroyed her. They thought they had landed the final blow, but all they had done was show her how afraid they really were. Maya nodded slowly, a single tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of defiance. That night, she didn't look at her old speech. She took out a fresh piece of paper. And she prepared something new. Something they could never rip down. The school board meeting was held in the high school auditorium, a formal, intimidating space with rows of plush red seats and a large, imposing stage. The air was stuffy, filled with the murmurs of parents and faculty. The board members, a panel of serious-looking adults, sat at a long table on the stage, looking out at the audience with an air of tired authority. The meeting agenda droned on: budget approvals, policy reviews, tedious reports. Then the superintendent cleared his throat. And now we have a special presentation from a student, Ms. Maya Rivera. A quiet ripple went through the auditorium. Parents turned in their seats, their faces curious. In the audience, Mr. Davies watched with a hopeful expression. Mr. Harmon sat near the back, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his face etched with a nervous guilt. Kelsey was there too, sitting with her parents, looking pale and miserable. Zach was nowhere to be seen. From the side of the stage, Maya emerged. The quiet whir of her wheelchair was the only sound in the suddenly silent room. She navigated to the center of the stage, positioning herself beside the podium. She wasn't hiding behind it. She was next to it, fully visible. Her short hair, which had once been a ragged mess, had been neatly trimmed. Her face was bare, her eyes clear. She looked small on the large stage, but her presence was immense. She held a remote in her hand. Good evening, she began, her voice steady and clear through the microphone. It didn't tremble. My name is Maya Rivera. A few weeks ago, something happened to me that made me feel invisible. Someone tried to take a piece of my identity. So I used my art to tell my story. Behind her, on the giant screen that usually displayed meeting agendas, an image flickered to life. It was a high-resolution photograph of her ripped and defaced artwork, the word liar screaming in red. The audience gasped. This is what happened to my art yesterday, Maya said calmly. This is what they did to my voice when they thought I was getting too loud. They tried to erase my story and call me a liar. She clicked the remote. The image of the destroyed art faded, and a new one appeared. It was a stunning, black-and-white portrait of Maya herself. It was a close-up of her face, her head held high, her eyes looking directly into the camera lens with an expression of unflinching strength. And beneath the portrait, a simple, powerful caption appeared in bold letters. You cut my hair. You didn't cut me down. The image was breathtaking. It was more powerful than any charcoal drawing. It was the truth, undeniable and raw. They were right about one thing, Maya continued, her voice resonating with quiet power. My drawings were a lie. Not because the story wasn't true, but because the story wasn't finished. The real story isn't about what was done to me. It's about what I did next. She looked out at the sea of faces, no longer afraid. For a long time, I thought being strong meant I had to stand up. I thought my chair made me weak. I thought my silence made me a victim. I was wrong. Dignity isn't something people can take from you. It's something you reveal. And standing up for yourself doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it just means you stop hiding. She paused, letting her words settle over the room. I never needed to stand up to be seen. I just needed to stop hiding. A profound silence held the auditorium in its grip. Then from the back of the room, one person began to clap. It was Mr. Harmon. He was on his feet, his face streaked with tears. He stood up and spoke, his voice thick with emotion but loud enough for all to hear. She's right. And I hid too. I'm her teacher. I saw what happened and I did nothing. I failed her. And for that, Maya, I am truly and deeply sorry. His apology broke the dam. The entire auditorium rose to its feet, the applause deafening, a wave of support and admiration washing over the stage. In the middle of the crowd, Kelsey was sobbing openly, her mother holding her. She looked at Maya and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." Maya saw her and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was acknowledgement. It was closure. The next day, the news was all over the school. Zach was suspended, pending a full disciplinary hearing. Mr. Harmon had voluntarily enrolled in a new teacher training program on student intervention. The school board had approved a new, fully funded Art as a Voice initiative to be spearheaded by Ms. Diaz. But the biggest change was in the hallways. As Maya wheeled to her class, the path cleared for her as it always did. But this time it was different. Students didn't just step aside. They met her gaze. They nodded. Some smiled. It wasn't pity. It wasn't offer a victim. It was respect. It was the kind of respect you give an equal. Her head was high, her short hair a crown of her own making. Her eyes, no longer shielded, were clear and bright, seeing everything. She was no longer an island. She was the one who had changed the tides. She was Maya Rivera, and she was finally, fully seen. And she never ever looked back. Maya never looked back, but her story leaves a powerful mark on everyone who hears it. Stories like hers remind us of the quiet strength inside everyone, waiting to be revealed. If you were moved by Maya's journey, you'll find a whole playlist of stories about underdogs getting the justice they deserve. I'll leave a link in the comments for you to check out. Thank you for watching.